Hey everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Straight Up Startups presented by Founders Live. My name is Connor Kaysen, and today, as always, I'm joined by Nick Hughes. Nick, how you doing?
I'm good, Connor. How you doing, man?
Doing very, very well. I'm excited to get started in some of these topics. I think we have a good show lined up for us today. I know to start, Nick, we kind of this is in conjunction with your kind of new project, Founders Live. You want to give us a little introduction, just where I think most people are watching us today?
Absolutely. Founders Live, LIVE .com. It's a social platform for entrepreneurs and founders. We launched it about a little over 2 months ago, almost 3 months ago now, and we're over 330 members. It's growing. It's fun. We've had we've had some awesome talks. Being, and we're excited to really just have great content and collaborate and community around entrepreneurship.
Excellent, excellent. Well, yeah, what the whole point of Straight Up Startups, for any of you who are first-time listeners, is usually we have anywhere from 5 to 10 topics, just about big news things from throughout the week, and we go back and forth talking about that. We also throw in some just more broader concepts about what it's like to be a founder, what it's like to work in startups, and just some tips, experiences, things that we've learned through our experience in startups the last couple years here, specifically in Seattle. So the first thing that I want to start off with, Nick, was we just had a big announcement from Twitter. It's kind of something that they've been working on. All these tech companies are all about live streaming now. So Twitter just came out and said that they partnered with both the NHL and Major League Baseball on top of their previous partnership with the NBA, that they're going to do live streaming of the games coming up. So I want to know from you, Nick, are you going to watch things on Twitter? Kind of what are your expectations, and are you going to be a user of these things?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this whole movement of live streaming. Clearly, what we're doing right now, but just the fact that you can access the games, the content on Twitter I'm excited about it. I am selfishly excited because there is a personal project that I'm working on that will mesh really well with these real-time sports events streamed on social platforms. So I think you're going to see a lot of great, cool, innovative activity around not just the game, which is streamed on the platform, but some interesting apps around real-time data and real-time engagement. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I think it's awesome. I think that this is a great move for Twitter. You're going to see probably the same thing from Facebook or other, I think Facebook will make a big play in this direction as well. And they know that there's billions of sports fans around the world. And if Twitter wants to grow, they got to tap into the people that have never been on Twitter, but maybe they want to watch the game and they don't have a cable TV, right? So I think it's a good idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting move just because Twitter interacts so much in live time, which a lot of the other platforms are getting away. And Twitter kind of hinted that they're getting away from it, but I think they're kind of going back to their roots that having everything in live time is most important. And sports is all about that. It's really hard to watch sports that are on delay because if you're anywhere on the internet, you're going to see the score if you're invested in those things already. But yeah, the contract's 6-year partnership with those, like that's a long term. I know Twitter's sitting on $1 billion in cash, so they're not going anywhere, but they are really struggling from kind of the tech perspective. And so I think it was a really good idea, probably great for both MLB and NHL because they get to branch out a little bit. But I think Twitter's really a great platform for people to communicate in live time. There's already so many people chattering out there in lifetime about all these events, so it kind of goes hand in hand. And I'm just really interested to see design-wise how they're going to make these connections because kind of with the live stream and the feed, and I know we've played around with that with our show, kind of having the live chat box is really interesting to see a worldwide community communicating all in one place, or is it going to be multiple places? I'm really interested in how they're going to solve that problem.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting is I think taking a step back, looking at why cable. When you look at cable TV, I think you can attribute a lot of the rise of what TV has come into our life as is sports, right? I mean, I think if you're like a sports fan like me, I watch the amount of minutes that I watch TV in a week. The majority of that is sports.
Yeah.
So when you now go, I think the transition into these social platforms or real-time streaming, sports is also going to have a huge impact, and it'll be interesting to see. I think using the technology to its advantage, what sort of real-time experiences will they have on top of the Twitter, just the normal 140 character chat.
Yeah, I agree.
Next topic here, big news. Everyone anticipated this for a long, long time. Verizon acquires Yahoo. Is this good, bad? Is it just the way that this just needed to go? What do you think in this whole thing?
It's tough, right? Because Yahoo, not even a decade ago, was the biggest company in the world, kind of pre-iPhone. Right, they were valued at like $125 billion, and so to sell for $5 billion, it's funny to see what I'm writing about and saying, it's the most disappointing $5 billion sale ever, because they just haven't been able to pull it together. And so I think the article that we originally pulled this source from did make a good point, and I think Marissa Mayer said this, that Yahoo and AOL really did pioneer consumer-facing internet. I remember, having an AOL login was the first time I ever accessed the internet, and then Yahoo became like the first search engine that really got out there. I remember seeing the Inspector Gadget movie like back in the 90s, and they had a giant Yahoo advertisement in there, and they had the big Yahoo slogan and everything. And so for Verizon to buy them, I find that interesting for Verizon, because they're still doing really well. They're probably number one in the mobile service market with all of their cell phone services. But to buy these two legacy companies and say, oh, we're going to reach 2 billion people now because we have all this, I think it just makes a bigger sinking ship in general. Taking these two big companies that are really struggling, who are burning an obscene amount of money every single day, and not really innovating in the way that is keeping up with where everything's going. I think this is going to be really tough on Verizon to take on both those companies. I think it's going to drag it down more, especially with T-Mobile doing so well kind of within that space. I think Verizon, it's going to be very scary for them that now they have their hands in so many buckets trying to reach all these consumers that it's going to be tough for them to keep competing and not let T-Mobile take over some of their market share.
Yeah, I think it just had to happen. It's basically one brand, and then you look at Verizon. I mean, they're the big one now, and I think that they're making a play to be the new AT&T, and so I think it's a good strategy from that point in terms of that's what they had to do. But I had no real strong feelings about Yahoo. I've not really visited that. I would go to Yahoo Finance every so often, but never been really a major user, and I think in AOL the same thing. So I think it is, and it's really just a massive, asset play. They're just trying to combine enough to get a huge reach, and whether I don't know their main strategy. I didn't read into it too much, but this is just a place for the shareholders to get something back. It is crazy that in 2000 they were literally $120 billion. To sell for that little is just insane. To me, it's just crazy. And I actually, to kind of go off a little bit of a topic here, I think the point that what's interesting, I read an article today that said, it quoted the 120, and then it actually mentioned that if your strategy was based on previous, Yahoo was the desktop. They're clearly nothing, they are not anything in mobile. And if you look towards the next phases, the companies now that are mobile, or they're, you look at Facebook, they're huge, but are they making the transition the right way? And like Snapchat, okay, Snapchat's growing and they're big now, but what about in 10 years when we might not be holding this device in front of us? So, it's kind of like, make your dough now and know that in 10 years, look, you got to take note of Yahoo and what they just went through, because Snapchat might be $20 billion valuation now, but does that mean they're going to be the same in 10, 20 years if they don't make the right decision? So that's what I found interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if any company is going to be able to continue to survive like that. I think Apple might end up being one of these legendary companies that kind of got to this level and maintained it for a while. I think Uber's kind of starting to chase that a little bit. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. The way technology speeds up right now, no one can keep up with it. It's just things are moving way too quickly. There's so many startups. There's such a culture on innovation and getting new things out there and being bigger and better that it's going to be hard for any big company to keep up. But speaking of big companies always doing new things, our next topic deals with Amazon. And so when you and I shared this article, it was from last week, reported by GeekWire, that Amazon kind of put a little press release out there that they're going to have, or maybe they didn't put a press release, but some of these drivers came out and said they got asked to drive. So to give you a little background, Amazon has this program called Flex, and it's kind of like an Uber competitor. In certain hours, they have just normal consumers like you and I do deliveries for them. And so how it got leaked was they reached out to a bunch of these drivers and said, on July 31st, are you going to be available from 9 p.m. till 2 a.m., which is a very obscure time. And so that sent off a bunch of fireworks about what this is going to be. And so the original topic before today was, what do you think it's going to be? And there were things thrown out there, related to video games, about new services, about new products for them. But it comes out that on the 31st, they're launching the brand new Harry Potter book, which is a book based off a screenplay, but it's in the future of where it's like 20 years later from where Harry Potter went. But the whole concept, I want to talk with you, Nick, and what you think about it, is that they're actually doing physical deliveries at midnight to kind of match that release. And I've been to video game releases at like Microsoft and game stores before and sat there at midnight. I got an Xbox One at the midnight launch. I was there waiting in line. But what do you think about this whole like delivery thing of, hey, we have a 4-hour window, we're going to get them all out to everyone?
Oh, it's a great marketing concept, marketing play, right? And that's, I applaud Amazon for thinking about a unique way to announce this, to drive attention, interest, and they chose a in the middle of the night kind of thing, right? And that's pretty cool. And it's just like, I remember, I remember the episode 1 of Star Wars. It was like a midnight show. I remember going to it. Like, it's crazy, right? Like, and it's unique, and they drove people just because it was like the first screening and it was midnight. And dude, we stood in line forever. It was really crazy. But so Amazon's doing the same thing, right? They're not saying like, hey, we're gonna deliver it at noon and 4. No, they're saying we're gonna do it at midnight, and so that brings up interest. Then it drives more attention in media, and now all of a sudden you're driving some interesting growth and sales. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's cool, and I would like to see more creativity around these sort of things. Just because, why not? It's creative.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I read today that it was the book, and my girlfriend has already pre-ordered the book, I know she's getting it on her Kindle, but if she was getting the physical book, she'd be waiting at our front door for that delivery person to get there. And so it's created that same anxiousness that you would have by going to the store, waiting in line at a bookstore, but now you just get to do it at your house. So I thought it was a genius idea by them, and I know they first tested it with the release of Call of Duty last November, which I'm sure kind of sparked how well this is going to go. The one thing that I am surprised, we had the first Amazon store here at University Village in Seattle, and they, as of right now, don't have a midnight release. So I thought that was weird. So there's rumors that they could still do it if there's enough people that are interested in going there at night. But I think by Amazon's perspective is, why send people to the store when we're doing this whole thing to deliver it to them at home? But that is a whole marketing opportunity to get people to go into your store. I'm sure so many people haven't visited the Amazon store yet. And
I haven't.
Yeah, I've walked by, but I've never gone in. I tried to go in once, and they were closed. And they kicked me out right at the front door. And, so with Harry Potter, that was one of the rumored products that was going to get released. And so it was, how some people guess that is beyond me. But Harry Potter is bigger than any other book. It's bigger than Game of Thrones. It's bigger than of those. And so I don't know how they're going to do it, how they're going to deliver that many books. I assume there's just so many Kindle versions. But I'm really excited. I think on the 31st, which happens to be J.K. Rowling's birthday and Harry Potter's birthday, which is very, very interesting that those come out at those times. But I think it's going to be a big night. It's going to be a pretty crazy Sunday.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. All right, hey, let's go ahead and move on, though. Okay, deciding, how do founders decide the equity split, man? And this was a TechCrunch article. It hits home for me because I think it's like one of the most important topics that startup founders need to fully understand. And I think the question to pose to you is, should they split 50-50, or what other ways should founders actually look at splitting equity?
Yeah, and I don't have as much experience kind of being the founder. I've been more employees at startups thus far. So I was just kind of always under the assumption like, oh yeah, everyone just splits it evenly. So to see this different perspective, I thought was really refreshing to see. Because my experience is, yeah, usually someone puts in more work, effort, time than the other person. And that should be equally rewarded as well. And splitting it down the middle, or evenly, should I say, really does create a lot of problems when it comes to decision makers. And so I thought that the article was very interesting in pointing out that investors see that and they notice that, and it can somewhat be an influence because they understand that this is how decisions are going to be made or not made or hindered in the future. So I mean, I thought it was a great idea. And the examples that the article gave were great. They're talking about the one example where he was proven wrong was two college students had built some hardware product. One of the founders dropped out of school. The other one stayed in school. The one that dropped out was obviously going to be putting more time in, but they still decided to go 50-50. And maybe that was just them being new into the environment and not really understanding. And it didn't quote who it actually was, so we'll see. But yeah, I think that's something that as I start future companies, I'm going to think about. If just because one person had built this piece of technology, if they're not going to be present, they're not going to actually help build the company, doesn't mean they deserve 50% if it's people.
Yeah, it's crazy because on the surface, you and a friend or you meet someone and you're like, hey, yeah, let's start. You decide to really start the company. It feels balanced to say, okay, let's just split it half and half. That's like the wholehearted thing to do. The problem with that is then you now have two equal holding partners that there is so many times in a company's lifetime that decisions need to be made and that leadership needs to be taken. Someone needs to, at the end, hold the responsibility. And when you have a 50-50 equal split, that typically is very difficult to determine who's actually going to lead. Possible, but it makes it a lot more difficult. Secondly, yes, then I think the next conversation is amount of time and effort and ownership and sweat and blood and tears that each person is going to put in the company. And so it's just really difficult because, look, you're starting a company and you know the journey is going to be very long, years and years, and yet up in the first point of starting the company, you're determining who gets what. You know work has been done. You don't know how much time. You know if the person's going to be around in a year. And yet you're saying, oh, I own 60 or 50 or 30. And so creating equity in a company and what the split is actually incredibly difficult. I don't think that there's one way to do it. But per this article, 50-50 I think is a mistake. And I would urge any founder and their co-founders to really sit down, have a really, really difficult conversation, and who's going to have the majority. And just in the end, it says, man up, be adults, and figure it out.
Yeah, and I think you made some really good points there with just you gotta man up and do it, but you don't really know. It's pretty crazy that you make one of the biggest decisions in your company, at least in that first year, before the company really even starts.
Yeah.
A lot of times, right? And say like, oh, we're in this together 50-50, and you haven't even figured out what you're going to be doing day to day or how it's going to work.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, really seek legal advice, and then also check who you're taking the legal advice from, but use lawyers. They're going to help you.
Yeah, and I know we're going to come back to lawyers here in a couple topics. But the next one comes from a really popular article written by, his name's Haseeb Qureshi. I hope I didn't butcher his name too much. But a little while back, he actually wrote an article about how he negotiated his job offer for Airbnb. He's a software engineer, used to be a professional poker player, and it just got all this acclaim about like, how did you do that? And, you know, where does this come from? And so he wrote a follow-up article about it, just about his 10 practices for negotiation. He's only released the first, I believe, 6. But I want to talk about that because I think it is very important in today's world, and right now specifically, it is a worker's market. If you're in the tech industry, you're probably somewhat in high demand. If you're good at your job, there are a lot of companies out there that are hiring like crazy, and you do have a little bit more power, at least right now, to negotiate your ways in. And so, Nick, I just kind of wanted to hear from you. You know, what's one or two of the points that you really liked about negotiation that you think our listeners should know when getting to these moments?
Yeah, if you read the article, which we'll post, there's 10 rules, but it's actually a very long article, very full of interesting and informative, just tips and all that. But one of the ones that stood out was get everything in writing, and that's like, this is a negotiation, and you need the data and the details, and you get it in writing. And now you can afterwards evaluate it after the moment, and you can form your thoughts, and also it just keeps people honest. So that's the one thing, I think, get it in writing. And two, I think on a more general level, I fully agree with this article. Negotiate, and clearly you have to understand how to negotiate correctly, but man, negotiate. Don't just take the first offer, especially money-wise. Don't just accept it. Negotiate and have valid points of why you should be earning more money, or whatever the 10-20% more what you're negotiating on. Or think about this: negotiate maybe paid time off, or maybe non-paid time off, whatever. There's in addition to money, there's actually other ways that you can negotiate a better quality employment experience. Options are another thing, right? But I think and a couple other points where be winnable, be positive, clearly articulate yourself, add value, show them that you're a very valuable person, and then your negotiation actually is supported by that. But I fully agree. You got to negotiate, and you're going to get more than you expected, and probably what you're worth. What do you think? Have you negotiated on a salary position before?
Yeah, so my first job out of college was actually as a recruiter for an agency. So what I was doing is I was helping recruit contract workers for Microsoft, T-Mobile, Amazon, AT&T, Expedia, kind of all these big Seattle tech companies. And so, yeah, every week I was negotiating with a contractor about what their salary was. And that was a little bit different dynamic. And so something I wanted to point out, if you saw this article and you're listening to us, if you're working on contract, this negotiation is usually happening before the offer is put out. That negotiation isn't set in stone, but that is it does happen beforehand. So they say, hey, we have this software engineering position that we want this, this, and this. At Microsoft, it's a 6-month contract. Will you take $50 an hour? Like, they're going to hold you to $50 an hour. They're going to try their best. Later on, they do have a little bit of wiggle room, but you really got to be like a home run candidate. And with contracting, usually it is more competitive. Usually they submitted 5 to 10 people, and you might not be the only one. So you do have to be careful pushing your power, and I dealt with that a ton while I was a recruiter. But yeah, I had lots of experience dealing with withholding information on both sides.
Oh yeah.
And don't be afraid to negotiate is the thing that he really wants to emphasize in this article. Is like, you've got to do it. And I think people are timid that it's going to ruin something. And 99 times out of 100, the company's not going to drop it because you push back a little bit and at least inquired about what other options are out there.
Oh yeah, I would just sum this up by saying that you don't get what you don't ask for. And I learned that, and I finally kind of figured out, oh, geez, they were going to give me this if I asked for that. They actually gave me it, right? And everyone, look, they're possibly thinking that, they would take, it's twice as much as your current offered salary, and you just have to go up a little further. Maybe it's 10-20%, you'll be happy with that. But if you don't ask, you don't get. So, but hey, moving on. Another interesting article. This was on a Medium post that talks about the M&A, or mergers and acquisitions activity. Kind of correlated with the drop in IPOs. And so what I think is really important is, we should talk about, I guess, why the M&A activity is heated up, and is that a good sign for early stage founders and possibly people listening to this?
Yeah, well, I really liked how this article pointed out just kind of the flow on how these things all happen is we've had this kind of big boom of these billion-dollar unicorns who are starting to get successful, but then they get to a big enough period where they can't innovate and evolve and be as risky as they were before when they're small. So instead of taking risk and doing all this R&D, they actually just acquire the smaller players within that niche that they want to find, who've already done the R&D, proven a market, shown that they have traction in customers, to kind of just move that process forward. And then yeah, it kind of creates this cycle of acquisition, and then 2 years later you start to see the IPOs again. And I thought that whole cycle was very interesting. And so to hear that, like the next big companies are going to be Uber and Lyft, and who are the other ones that they listed? And there's a couple other that are going to start being the acquisition companies, opposed to the Verizons and the Apples and the Googles out there. And so very interesting. I think that it's a big benefit right now with the market, and I think it's interesting how it fits. There's less funding going on right now, so I think founders are going to be more desperate to sell, because a lot of times that becomes either the only option for them because they're struggling to raise money. So it's very interesting how it fits very well within the cycle that these companies were the ones that made it out of the bubble, pre-bubble, and then when it does explode, the founders that didn't make it out of there but still might have good products are going to get sucked up and be more willing to sell because they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, there is when you look back about 3, 4, 5 years, there was a ton of funding activity, and that forced a huge group of companies into the pipeline that now the IPO pipeline is very, very slow and cold. And yeah, I just think there's going to be more and more acquisitions that are going to happen over the course of the next 2-3 years. This individual suggests that around 2018 that the IPO market will probably open back up. We don't know, but the point is that there is a ton of cash. Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, the amount of cash they have on their books just needs to be put to use. And then also there's just a huge group of younger, early stage, mid stage companies that probably are going to have a hard time raising. And that means there's going to be some acquisitions. And yeah, I think it's important that founders, even at the early stages, know that you got about 2 years, maybe a little more, maybe 3, to create something, and maybe you get a quick exit. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's part of what you want to do. But this is the time to prepare for that. Maybe it's not a time. It takes like 7 to 10 years to go public. So if you want to get liquidation out of your company and actually move on to do something else, it's probably not going to be an IPO. So it's probably going to be an acquisition. So knowing that these things are heating up is really, really important. You can plan for it.
Yeah. The big one that the article mentions is Dollar Shave Club. It got bought for $1 billion by Unilever.
Yeah.
Owns half of the grocery store. But it's interesting, and I think that some of the commonalities that I've noticed from the companies talked about. First, said the big trends in industries were automotive, food, healthcare. These industries that are dominated by giant companies. But what these smaller startups have done is they have found their niche. They found a specific target market, and they hyper focus on those people, and they nicked away at that certain segment. And they got in so where these big companies have no option but to acquire them. And I think it's very impressive. And it kind of says, like, just because there is a big player, right, even in the future, right, there's the Uber or the Lyft or Apple, whatever it is, there are still opportunities because these companies are so big that they're going to miss specific markets. So Dollar Shave Club comes in, says we can be faster, we can be more efficient at doing this. We know that there's a need, so they get the delivery service, and then all of a sudden Unilever loses their whole market share, and they have to acquire the company just to get that market share back.
Yeah.
That was very interesting. But so the next one I thought was great, and this actually comes from one of your users, so I want you to talk about it a little bit more on Founders Live. But tell us a little bit about some of the crowdfunding do's and don'ts that was written about.
Right, yeah. This was an article written on Founders Live by one of our members, and the company that they are building is called Forward Force, and it's a crowdfunding site, has a unique angle on competitive nature to putting ideas out there and then getting them crowdfunded. So it's kind of cool. You should check it out. But the founder actually wrote about essentially do's and don'ts, and really just touching on, if you're thinking about crowdfunding, here's some things to consider. And what jumped out at me, I'll ask, I'm wondering your thoughts, but what jumped out at me is that he mentioned you should choose it's essentially the all-in metric, which is basically the crowdfunding campaign will only go if you hit a certain level. And there's just, based on the data that they've determined, they've looked at a number of different campaigns, and the ones that set a threshold and they only get the money when they reach that are more successful. And it actually shows it proves a little more confidence in the people that are funding the project. It also, so I thought that was interesting. And then secondly, I think another point is, and I say this a lot, I say, look, and I've never done a crowdfunding campaign, so I don't really know. But if you're talking about Kickstarter or something, and you're looking at you're building something, and you just want to raise money and actually get customers, I think it's very important to understand. Be careful of what you actually want, and you might get it. You might get millions of customers that you now have to fulfill. And so another point that they make in there is that double and triple check your math, and also probably double the amount that you're going to raise, because you don't want to do a crowdfunding campaign, be successful, now have hundreds of thousands if not millions of customers to deliver, and now you can't afford to deliver. Like, that's worse than almost falling flat and never even actually getting off the ground. So I think those two things are huge. Know what you're doing with a crowdfunding campaign and put a lot of effort into preparation.
Yeah, I think the all or nothing concept is really exciting to see that where crowdfunding has gotten so far, and that is now a thing that has been adopted, because there have been all the scandals and the scams, and people have come out with hundreds of thousands of dollars scamming people for crazy products and just walked away with the money. So to see that now we're at that point where it's like, this is the standard, that here's the minimum bar that we have to hit if we're even going to produce. And that helps the consumer a little bit, but it also makes the company a little bit more reliable that they're going to deliver, because plenty of these companies don't deliver. So we'll see how that's going to play out over the next decade, and kind of, if people pay money, what they're actually owed. The other thing that I really liked in this article was talking about building up a community before you launch. And I didn't think about that either, but that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of these things trend, right, and they become the hot topic. So you want to have people that ahead of time are going to put their commitment in on day one, day two, so that it kind of gets that snowball effect going, and whatever platform you're on is going to go, wow, like, these guys started off real hot, it must be a great product, and then other they promote it and see it.
Yeah, very good point. All right, so we're going to move on to our last topic, and this comes from the Silicon Hills Lawyer, and it's around term sheets and understanding what the process is all about and how you should go about evaluating one and accepting one. And just a real quick background here. Term sheets are when you're raising money from an investor. There's certain terms and conditions on the amount that you're receiving from them. A lot of that's around percentage ownership. What sort of equity do they get? Is it preferred shares, common shares? I mean, we could spend hours on those topics. You should read the article. But the point here is that a term sheet, when you pitch or talk to investors and you're negotiating around things, at some point it becomes more official, and there's a sheet that has all these agreed or presented terms. The point is that is a very difficult document to evaluate. You should, as a founder, bring in your lawyers and evaluate it. But how should you go about? What's the process of accepting it? How do you negotiate around those terms? What do they mean? The point of this article was, you should not you shouldn't be too quick to make a decision and accept the terms of the term sheet from the investors that are choosing to give you money, because you got to be careful of what's in there. And a lot of founders here in Seattle or San Francisco or Silicon Valley or anywhere in the world that can tell you they signed it and then realized it's not a very good deal, or there's provisions that will end up screwing them in the end depending on the direction of the company. And so it's a tough deal. I mean, you're excited when you have millions of dollars going to come into your bank. You just want to accept the term sheet. But the point of this piece that was written was really understand the details, take some time, not just a day or two, take a few days at least, maybe a week, to review it with legal help. It's so important. And there's just startup death valley is littered with companies that took the wrong terms, and now that they went down or they lost a lot of equity, and just also probably had a rough relationship with their investors. So what came across from your perspective on this?
The big thing that I thought is just about having reliable, trustworthy people within your inner circle, right? When you get to this time, you want to make sure that you have mentors who are not necessarily financially at stake here, so they can give you real advice from their experience. So specifically having that circle of people who have done this before, but that also aren't invested. I think that those are kind of the big important things. And yeah, take your time. Don't just sign because you're excited that you're going to get $1 million or $100,000 or $100. Really take your time, just like the negotiation conversation we had. Make sure that you go through all the details, every single key point there, how it's going to affect you in 1 month to 10 years, and really make sure you do all the due diligence you can. It's a deal with the devil if you don't do it.
Yeah, it's one of the most important decisions, probably outside of the co-founder issue that we just talked about previously. Take step up and say, hey, look, we need to take some time on this, because it's the most important document that you will sign for the future of your company, and you want to make sure you know what everything is in there and know what. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's all the show we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Nick, always a pleasure hanging out with you on Tuesday night. Do you got any final words for us?
My final words today are, hopefully the replacement of the Sounders coach turns things around. How about that?
Yeah, hopefully a culture change. Hopefully we get someone who can turn it around.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Have a good night.
See you later.